The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this featured webinar, Advanced Veeam SQL Server Backup. My name's Rick Vanover and I'm a product strategy specialist here at Veeam Software, and I'm happy to talk to you about this topic today. This is a very important topic to many virtual machine administrators as well as DBAs. And this one actually speaks well to some experiences I've had in my professional experience, so I'm pretty sure everyone will benefit here today. As we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions, find the question panel on the GoToWebinar screen. I'll do my best to answer the question during the webinar, but I might have to hold it until the end. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded, so you're going to get a copy of this webinar for replay and a link at the PowerPoint slides that will be sent to you as a follow-up email. And of course, all of the replays of webinars can be found at veeam.com on the videos page. So let's get started. This is a pretty deep and complicated topic that I could really talk all day about, but I do want to be mindful of your time. So let's get started. One of the first things I want to talk about is why or why not virtualizing SQL as a workload is a good idea. And we'll talk about that. There actually are quite a few considerations there. But I think one of the challenges we have is making sure we can protect SQL Server accordingly as we go virtual. So I'm going to talk at length about how the Veeam backup engine works. Most importantly, how does the restore work? I want to make sure all of our restore situations can be addressed with Veeam with virtualized SQL servers. But I'm pretty sure I have some options on the restore that you didn't even think you could do with Veeam, much less a virtualized SQL server. So I'm pretty sure somebody's going to walk out of here a little bit surprised at what they see. My job here is to tell you how Veeam can help you with that. So let's go ahead and get started. I think one of the first things I want to do is just kind of level set. SQL Server is a very critical workload. There's a lot of things that go into it, meaning applications are really driven by it. And chances are, if you have SQL Server, it's important. Secondly, I think I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that all SQL Server VMs are not created equal. And I could really say that about every virtual machine, meaning no storage, no networks, no backup windows, no expectations. Those are all different across the different environments that we all work on. So I think it's important that we all kind of level set that everyone's requirements are different, but what we can do may help us meet those requirements and expectations. And there are a number of things that will point us down that route. The first of which is how we do our backup. Okay, so if you're like me, you kind of grew up, if you will, doing backups as SQL Server agent jobs or SQL Server maintenance plans, right? I'm going to talk about those, but I'm also going to talk about possibly doing something additional to that. VSS is a part of the story, part of the conversation that I'll talk about here today. I think that VSS is a great framework to leverage. I mean, Windows gives us this framework to use for things like backups. Let me show you some cool things you can do with it. But then also, we have to remember the fine points, like having adequate backups in terms of frequency and making sure logs are taken care of. So these are some of the big picture things that are going to lead my direction of what we're going to talk about here today in regards to the backup and, most importantly, in regards to the restore. So let's start with that first question I posed. Why or why not virtualize SQL? Now, last time I looked at the calendar, it is 2013. I probably shouldn't have to convince too many of you that virtualization is a good idea. But I understand there are some workloads you may have held off on. And I don't have all of the answers, specifically licensing, right? That really varies from organization to organization. But the good news is we have a lot of resources to help us out. Virtualization today in 2013 has really advanced in terms of resources. So what I mean by that is if you want to find the best practices to virtualize SQL Server on VMware or Hyper-V, I'm convinced those materials are out there. Secondly, there also are a lot of resources specific to Veeam. The Veeam forums come to mind, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But basically, you have a resource, a support network, including vendor-issued best practices. And even with Veeam, we have some KBs, we have some requirements docs, we also have how-to guides for the SQL tools that we have. So when you put all those together, I'm convinced that the resources are there, but you might need one more thing. And I hope that the concept of the virtual lab and some of the SQL-specific things you can do will really make that journey to a virtualized SQL Server an option for you today. So the first thing I want to talk about is the key to how Veeam does its backups, and honestly a lot of other products. Veeam does what's called an image-based backup. Now, it's not a very complicated thing. It really is the whole virtual machine. There is, however, a lot of technology that goes into it. So when I talk about some of the different backup and restore options, I think it's also important, especially because we're talking about very specific things like SQL databases. It's also important that I highlight what is not capable or any gotchas, right? So I think now's a good time to bring up the first of those. So an image-based backup is an entire encapsulation of the virtual machine. That includes its relative configuration and components in the VMware or Hyper-V virtual infrastructure. It includes the operating system. It includes the applications and therefore the data. Okay, that's loosely speaking what an image-based backup is in the context of how we're going to talk about it with Veeam. But it's important to note it is not simply copying the VMDKs or VHDs. So it's more advanced than that, and it also is not simply taking a shadow copy or just picking up and copying the SQL MDFs and LDFs. So it's not just a robocopy through the file system. In the world of Veeam, it's also important to note that there are actually 26 different recovery options from this agentless backup. Now I use the word agentless here because this image works at the virtualization level. We do not install an agent inside the guest virtual machine. So let's take a look at how that looks here on the bottom right. So this is a simple graph from our free product, VeeamZip, which is part of Backup Free Edition. And this actually just says it really well. We take the VM that's running and we back it up and we put it onto a disk resource, and we have a number of different restore scenarios. Those are 3 of the restore scenarios. There are 23 additional ones, and one of them is very much specific to SQL Server, and we're going to talk about some of the other ones that apply to SQL as well. So that's an image-based backup, and again, it's not a simple copy of files. It really is an image of that VM. I also want to talk about probably the biggest gotcha or thing that might be missing from what the DBA or the virtual machine administrator may expect from their backup of a SQL database, and that's point-in-time restore. I got to be really clear. Veeam cannot by itself do a point-in-time restore. Why is that? Because the way we take that image-based backup is very much based on the point in time of that image-based backup. Now, let's do a little bit of a reality check. I would bet many of you, as SQL Server DBAs or even virtual machine administrators, have deployed or watched the DBA deploy SQL Server agent jobs and maintenance plans that do those point-in-time backups from a BAK and a TRN file, right? Those are those jobs that are set up, every day do the full BAK, and then every 2 hours possibly, then do log truncation. That way, you could go back to 1:09 p.m. in 13 seconds if you really needed to. But how many times have you actually done that? Now, if there's an expectation in your organization to have that recoverability, you actually still can do that with Veeam. We just simply still have to do those jobs. I actually think it's a great idea to go ahead and do that if you have that requirement and that expectation of that type of restore. But some of the image-based backup benefits that I'll show you probably will convince you that Veeam is also part of the picture. And specifically, there's things like a file copy job or putting those maintenance plan backups, agent job backups, putting those on a different drive letter. Those can really help you make Veeam and those types of jobs work together. So let's look at that real quick. So if you want to do them both, and I'm convinced a lot of people still will, If you're like me, you probably deploy your SQL servers much like the figure on the left. So if we have a virtual machine, let's just assume we've deployed 3 virtual disks. And again, in this example, it doesn't matter if it's VMware or Hyper-V. So VHD or VMDK file doesn't matter. So basically, you have the operating system, the SQL application, and the last drive is the data drive, and possibly even an additional drive for like SQL log files. You get the picture. Now, Veeam can protect that box perfectly and consistently and give you an incredible amount of recovery options. But what I'm recommending is actually putting those SQL Server agent jobs onto a different volume. Now you could put them on the same disk resource that the virtual machine is on, but let me tell you why I think that can help you if they're put outside of it. First of all, you can actually get more recovery options. So by having the backups off of that virtual machine, if you had to fully rebuild the virtual machine, meaning you lost a storage resource, those backups don't go with it, those point-in-time restores. Veeam can bring that whole virtual machine back very quickly, but if those SQL Server agent jobs are located out of band, if you will, you can then get the image back very quickly and then dial the time up exactly to where you need it. That's one scenario. Now the other benefit that this provides is actually your backup window would shrink, because if you look at the profile of these workloads, the operating system, the data, the application on the left, and then over on the right, the SQL agent jobs, you actually might have the most change rate over on the right. By having that change rate outside of the VM, that's really going to help increase the speed of the incremental backup. So you actually get a lot of different benefits by doing it that way. You can, of course, stack them all up. I recommend separating, but you still can get all the good features that Veeam provides. That includes the virtual lab capability. We're going to talk about that. I'm actually going to also show you that in action. Pretty sure you'll like that. Point-in-time recovery, so if you have those SQL Server agent jobs or SQL Server maintenance plans going to another volume, you can still dial those back. Whole virtual machine image recovery, that's sometimes very important to a lot of people, as well as instant VM recovery, our patented technology that lets us boot the entire virtual machine up, that whole image, directly from the backup. If this virtual machine on the left is 2 terabytes, that might take a while to copy over. This technology can boot it up in merely minutes. So I did use the term agentless, and whenever I'm talking to virtual machine administrators, they love it. They love to hear that. But then I talk to application people, then they start asking me questions. Questions come in 3 main categories. What about log truncation? What about application consistency? And what about granular recovery? The good news is, with Veeam, we actually can address all 3 of those situations. Let's first talk about log truncation. So I believe since the first edition, Veeam has included this application-aware processing. It's a step of the backup job, which is highlighted by some of the screenshots here below, that will actually properly prepare the log from a log truncation standpoint during the backup. So over in the top left, you'll see that the transaction logs are pruned on a successful backup. This is a great technique so that if you really go down the agentless backup route, you can make sure that your logs are properly maintained, because you all know that if you don't take care of the logs, they're not going to take care of themselves for you. Secondly, when it comes to application consistency, back to that mentioning of VSS. VSS is a framework where applications, the operating system, and backup applications can communicate for things like recovery techniques and more importantly, backups. We have our own VSS extension here that integrates into that framework that the operating system running SQL provides, so that we can properly prepare not just the operating system, not just the file system, but also the application. We can correctly prepare all 3 of those for the backup, and that is that 4th option of the Veeam Backup Wizard. In this example, it is VMware, but it's the same for both Hyper-V and VMware. This engine will interact with the guest virtual machine, and once it quiesces the virtual machine with this step of the backup job, we then communicate to the virtual infrastructure level. Then we'll do that Hyper-V shadow copy or a virtual machine snapshot of this VM. Once that step is done, we then resume through VSS and then start our data mover process. I'll skip over that for now, but if you have any questions, drop them in the panel here. But basically, those two things can properly prepare the virtual machine for the backup. And then most importantly, can we do granular recovery? The answer is yes. So the good news is that we can do all three of those big things from this agentless backup. So I did get a question from Matt. Hopefully the audio is okay now. Sorry about that. And Roderick has a question. Do we have a plugin for SQL backup? So good question, Roderick. And actually it's well timed here on the screen. So we don't have an agent that does the backups for us. Okay, that's important to set forth. I do have a tool where I can let restores be done on the database server or not on the database server. I'm going to show you that tool as we get into the interface here in a second. So let's talk about some of the specific restore options. I talked about the backup, agentless, image-based, works at the virtual machine infrastructure level for both VMware and Hyper-V. Off the top of my head, I came up with 7 different restore scenarios that you can do for a SQL Server VM. I did mention that there are 26 restore scenarios for the whole product. Here are 7 of them. Let's go through them real quick. The first one is the coolest, honestly. That's the UAIR, Universal Application Item Recovery. This is a great way to do item-level restores of that SQL Server database. Now, specifically for SQL Server, we have a wizard. So I realize some of you don't have SQL Server exclusively. What I mean by that is you might have mostly SQL, you might have some Oracle and MySQL, and you might even have some that are on Linux. That's fine. The way SQL Server, the SQL Server wizard works is that it does those item-level restores for SQL, but we also provide a framework that you can use your own native tools. So I'm going to show you that, but stand by, you'll see it. But basically, we have wizards for SQL, Exchange, Active Directory, files. We have something like that for SharePoint, which uses a SQL database. And then secondly, we have the virtual lab, which you can get in with anything. So the next restore scenario is what we're calling file level restore. Now that is inside of the guest virtual machine. And what I mean by that is I can restore just the MDF. If my DBA wants to pick up last night's backup of the SQL database, here you go. I can put this file wherever you want it. I can also extract the virtual disk. So if I have a disk with multiple VMs, multiple databases attached to that virtual disk, be it VHD, VHDX, or VMDK, I can actually extract that whole disk file and attach it to a virtual machine, SQL DBA, maybe their dev box, or back to the production possibly. Little caution here, if you do that, then it's immediately visible to the virtual machine, but that might enable the DBA to be needlessly consuming extra copies of the database and consume extra storage. So give some thought to that, but it is an option. And of course we can do our whole VM restore techniques, and that actually exists in 2 flavors. The first of which is rebuild that image, what I call whole VM restore. I think it might be called entire VM restore in the UI. But the other option is that instant VM recovery. That will allow the whole VM to be restored from our backup file directly. So you actually boot it up from the backup storage. We don't actually have to copy the whole 2 or 4 terabytes or whatever it is back to a production data store, aka the weight is gone. It can be as quick as 1 or 2 minutes to do that. Depends on the size of the VM, depends on the storage and a lot of other factors, but it's an incredibly fast restore technology. We were the first to have it, and we're actually just issued a patent for this technology. We also have the replica capability. So if you have a replicated infrastructure, we can fail over that virtual machine that's running SQL right from our replicated VM. And then the last one is what I'm calling shared FLR. It's a play on the second one up here, the file level restore, and I actually heard this one from our tech support team. That's one of the things I love about the office I'm in. I sit right next to them, and I could hear them talking about some things, and this was the greatest trick of all. Basically, when you do a file level restore, you can actually point to a UNC path and get an MDF directly. And I'm going to show you that one. So a couple of quick questions that come in. Let's go ahead and go through these real quick. So Bradley asks, are there additional license fees for using the agentless features? Good question, Bradley. I will have to double check, but everything I'm showing you, I believe, is available in at least the Enterprise, if not the Enterprise Plus edition. I don't know if the standard interface has the virtual lab, so that might be the only thing that isn't available in Enterprise edition. So if you have Enterprise or Enterprise Plus, Bradley, you're good. That's a short answer. Lucen asks, what impact does disabling application-aware processing cause? We currently have issues where it causes the backups to fail. Good question, Lucen. Now, there's a lot of things that can go into that may be giving you issues. First of which could be storage I/O load. Second of which could be the way the proxies are communicating. I'd hope that you've checked in with support or the Veeam forums for some guidance, but basically the impact is that the SQL database is not properly prepared. So Rob asks, is the whole VM restore in a crash consistent state? No, it is actually in an application consistent state. Hopefully that answers those questions. And Chris, I'm almost there. I am going to talk about that. Good time. And that is the gotchas screen. Again, I wanted to talk about the things you can do, but I also want to make sure that we don't get any situations where you might hit a gotcha. So Chris had asked about a pass-through disk, an RDM. That's a VMware technology that allows a virtual machine direct access to a storage resource. So the short answer is virtual mode RDMs are supported with Veeam, but physical mode RDMs are not. And let me tell you why. As part of our process, when I mentioned that when we quiesce the database, we take the Hyper-V shadow copy or the VMware snapshot, we can't take a VMware snapshot of the virtual machine if there's a physical mode RDM. So well, actually, you can't even do it in a vSphere client. So there are a couple of gotchas. The other one is using the iSCSI initiator in guest. So if you have some storage that you've provisioned over an iSCSI network and you have a virtual machine that instead of having the entire database live as VMDK or VHD, you're actually presenting IQN targets to the guest, that is not part of the virtual machine. So definitely watch for those two gotchas. Now again, there is a great set of resources. One is the Veeam forums and what other people in the community are doing. So a couple other questions came in. Brian and Ron, I will answer those later or towards the end. But James had asked, are there any gotchas with SQL 2012 Express? Actually, James, I believe that is fully supported, both definitely to back up, and I believe so on the restore. I checked the release notes of the SQL tool, but I believe that that is the case. Now, I'm going to go into the interview, or not the interview, but how about the interface? And I'm going to talk about the features we have for the backup and the restore. But I wanted to show you this little message here. This pops up when the virtual lab is ready, but through the magic of television and in the interest of everyone's time here, I've already prepared the lab. So basically right here is the message you get. This has already happened. You can see the screenshot is actually from a while ago. But I wanted to just show you that because when we go into the interface, in the interest of time, I've already prepared that. So this is Veeam Backup and Replication. If you haven't seen it before, welcome. But let's talk about, first thing, the backup. Basically, a couple people had asked about that. I want to show you the backup job here real quick. So basically, I've given the virtual machine backup job a name, and I can identify virtual machines to back up. Now, I'm only backing up this one SQL server, but if I wanted to add, say, every VM on a host, I could do that. If I wanted to add every VM that's located on a data store for one particular host, I could do that. So think of these like containers. Any construct in vSphere, cluster, resource pool, folder, data store, and then even vCloud Director vApps, virtual data center, virtual organizational virtual data centers, even system center clusters, okay, and Hyper-V, Hyper-V hosts. All those constructs can function like a container. Great way to do all your VMs so that you're not missing any. But let's just keep this example here, nice and easy. I'm going to skip over this notion of the proxy because it's really different than what we want to talk about here today. But where we put our backups or any disk-based backup resource, pretty much anything, I'm actually putting them on the V drive here, which is where it's a Windows Server 2012 deduplicated volume. If you have a medium or small size data profile, Windows Server 2012 is actually a great profile to put your backups on, your Veeam backups in particular. The deduplication you can get is actually pretty good. I was actually just going to check real quick and see what I'm getting here in terms of dedupe savings, and it's not reporting yet. It's almost full, but maybe not so good. But this is not a very big volume. I was actually in between labs due to version 7 coming out here soon. But nonetheless, we're generally storage agnostic, and I got some NFS, some CIFs, all kinds of different places. But I'm actually putting this on the same. This is actually the local disk that the Veeam server is on. Now, I did talk about that application-aware processing. So I've gone ahead and turned it on here, but basically I've dropped in a username, and I have those options for the success of the backup job. Okay, that will make sure that the log is truncated, that the virtual machine is properly quiesced, and that will make sure that the granular restore capabilities are good for this VM. And the last thing here is the schedule. Pretty flexible scheduler. I'm just going 10 o'clock every day. I could say every 4th Saturday, or could go every hour. It could go after some other backup job. You get the point. Pretty flexible scheduler. And then, of course, if I have something if it says maybe, you know what, that's the busiest time of my week, I can't do my backups then, I can even exclude the backup job from running in a certain time. Okay, that's the backup engine. Let's jump over to the SQL Server DB. So this particular system, I'm going to try and make it quiet here. Let's see what I got. Okay, I am a pretty brave soul. This particular system here, SQL 01, is actually running my production VMware data center, vCenter database, I should say. This database is live. It's running the environment here that is my vCenter. This is the real deal. I've got, let's see what I have, 419 VMs and a whole bunch of busy hosts. This database runs from here. All right, so I do trust this technology. Watch this. So I'm going to go over this sample database here. I have this small table, table 1. I don't have much in it. I'll give you that. Okay, I have 4 little rows here, but this is a production workload. I'm going to go ahead and delete this database, okay, or this table out of my test database. So you can pretty clearly see that that's gone. Now, I did mention to you that I have gone ahead and started my virtual lab. It is ready. So let's go ahead and open it and do a recovery technique. So what's going to happen here is my virtual lab is ready. I'll show you the steps here in a second, but I want to go ahead and restore that table. Let's go ahead and restore that from the backup. Now, I can actually restore it back into the database where it came from, or I can actually export it out as a script. DBAs might love it. Same thing with the schema and these query results. If I want to run a query against my old database, I have the capability here. I'm going to go ahead and restore that data that I just destroyed. So now what it's going to do, it's actually going to query the virtual lab, this backup in production. I'm going to show you how that works in a VMware environment here in a second. I'm going to talk about Veeam sample database in the term of what I had from backup and what I'm going to put back into production. Then it's going to do a quick little comparison. It's going to see what's running over here and what do I have running in this virtual lab. Now it's quickly going to see that that table 1 is available in what we backed up. And it's going to find that table, I think it was called table _1. Let's see what it comes back with. Table _1. Now I only had one table. I could have multiple in this view, but there is only one. And basically, if I wanted to, I could change the name. So maybe restored or something like that. That might make sense, kind of like the way you do files. But in this case, I'm going to maintain the name of that file. So let's go ahead and see what it comes back with here. Again, it has to interactively check the virtual machines that are running both in production and from our backup. All right, the new name is table_1, same as it was before. Now, depending on when this backup was taken, right, there might be different partition schemas or file groups in use in the way you've set up SQL. So let's look at the file group. I only have one, but you get the point that if you have multiple file groups, you could actually put that table back to where it goes in SQL Talk. I'm going to just try to, well, it's definitely going to go there, but I'm going to do that. And it summarizes the options, and then watch this. It's going to restore that table. It's given me a success statement. If I wanted to, I could then restart the wizard, but that's the only interactive one with this wizard. Now watch this. Table's back. Okay, that's not really that cool. All right, you know what? That's where an agentless backup, you know, pretty much anything can do that, right? Well, let's make it really cool. So I mentioned that it's a virtual lab. So if I go over here in the VMware environment, let's take a look at this host in the single instance cluster. And honestly, this host is, yeah, I use it a lot. It's pretty busy. It's out of memory. I'm sure you guys can relate. That production database is right here, SSA SQL 01. It's running my production vCenter database, actually running what you're seeing right here. Over here in this virtual lab, I have a instance, SSA-SQL 01 with a long GUID. That is the SQL database running in the virtual lab. Over here, this is a network proxy appliance that we use to manage access to that virtual lab. This is my production network. This is my virtual lab network. So if I go over here, you'll see that this particular virtual machine has the same IP address, 10.0.20.49, as the production database, who is on the he's on the production network, but this one is not. This is on the virtual lab network. So this duplicate IP is totally made okay because it's in an isolated interface here, and this particular port group doesn't even go to any configured ports. So not to get too far in the VMware weeds for you, but you see these virtual labs, they don't connect to anything. Okay, that being said, so Jim asked, do I have to recover the whole VM to do this lab? No. That's option one with the wizard that I showed you, but what I wanted to show you is because this is in this lab, watch this. This is amazing. I'm going to connect. So here's my production database server, SQL 01 Veeam. I'm actually going to connect in that virtual lab. There's a masquerade IP. I am going to skip over the networking, but remember it was 10.0. That's the masquerade IP address for the virtual lab. I do not have a domain controller in there, so I'm going to go ahead and drop in my SQL Server auth and look at this. Now I'm looking at last night's database in the virtual lab. So if I look over here, I can expand this table here. Look at this. I can run a query over here or run my native management tool. This is much like what I would do if it was MySQL, for example. I would skip the wizard and open up the virtual lab and get in with my native tool. If this were Oracle, that would be Toad. If it was MySQL, it would be another tool, etc. Because basically this virtual lab here is brokered access, and there's a rule that says who can get into it, just to be sure here. So if I go into this right here, I mentioned a virtual network proxy using the masquerade IP address. It's set right here, non-persistent. This goes away after Veeam is done with its thing. This route goes away. So that 10.252 network goes away. But basically, I can get in with my native tool. Here's an example for the DBAs out there. Let's say you changed a stored procedure, but you don't know what you changed, but you know you broke it. How do you get it back? This interface right here, where I'm looking down here at the virtual lab from last night's backup, and up here at the production database right now, I can safely look at what it was without having to pull all that storage back. In fact, this is only taking a couple of megabytes or gigabytes. Probably the RAM plus a little bit of changes is all that this is requiring for this to run. I do not have to pull back all. If it was a multi-terabyte database, do not have to pull all that back. And in this particular environment, this virtual lab was ready to go. And let's take a quick look here. Doing some quick math here. I started it at 11:27 a.m. or it was finished at 11:27, and I started it somewhere around that. It was ready in 10 minutes. There we go, 11:39. So it was ready in about 10 minutes. It moves pretty swift. It depends on your storage, okay? But basically, I'm able to look into last night's backup right here, just like that. Okay, well that's cool. Let's disconnect that connection, but I want to see another way of doing it. So I have this virtual lab. Okay, maybe you don't like the virtual lab. To Jim's question, I don't want to have to power it on in an isolated environment. That's fair. Let's go ahead and do this. So let's dismiss that lab, and let's watch what happens over here. So this job instantly went to stopping. You may notice that, the one that's selected. And if I go over here, you'll see that these are powered off. Watch this virtual machine. It's going to go away. That SQL Server VM is gone. Then the network proxy appliance is now powered off. There's housekeeping going on down there at the bottom. And now we're back to like nothing ever happened. Okay, but how can I still restore? I can go into the Restore menu. This particular example is of a VMware virtual machine. Talked about restoring individual VMDKs, but let me show you this particular trick. This is the Windows file system here from that SQL Server DB. I can expand that SQL Server. There it is. I can pick a restore point. I'll just pick the most recent one. And basically what's going to happen here is I'm actually going to browse into the file system of that VM. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I have actually represented the entire file system of this virtual machine in this view. And the way this database is set up, this is where my content is, right here in data. So what I can actually do if I wanted to is do that. Pretty handy. Well, actually, I was wrong database. If I wanted to do that, I could do that pretty handily. But watch this. This is done and dusted. Let's go ahead and close that. But watch this. So if I wanted to look at that path that I just looked at, this view is actually a cute little window into our backup. These are effectively shortcuts to the virtual disk that we have encapsulated in that restore point. So I can actually get this UNC path right here. I can send that over to my DBA and say, hey, how about this? This is all from last night. Will that help you? Right? So the timestamp on that is right here. Here's the sample one. If you just want the log, you can copy those. Watch this. I can put it in here. It's a simple example. I can put it over here. I can go over here as the DBA. Whoops, not a new database, but I could attach a database. I can browse to that file that I just put in place. Of course, no one would ever put it in their My Documents, but you get the point. I now have a usable, I think I do. There it is. I actually can do it. Okay. No one would ever do that in production. You get that, but I need the log file. But basically, I could put that in there and then attach that database straight away. So I'm not, log file is not populated, it's not. So, but basically, you get the point that I could do that just like that. Anyways, I'm not really sure why that, oh, same name, that's why. That's a feature of SQL Server. So anyways, you get the point. If that database wasn't there, I could attach it that easy. If I wanted to use my native tools, I can do that. I can do file level recovery, all kinds of features right from this agentless backup. Now, there's also probably the coolest feature is what we call instant VM recovery. Now, I did mention that this particular one is my production SQL Server database running vCenter. I do want to keep it up. Our tech support team is using it, but I'm going to show you the coolest feature right here. That's what we call instant VM recovery. So watch this. I'm actually going to find that virtual machine from the backup I took, and I'm actually going to power it on from the most recent backup directly from the backup file. So if I right-clicked and deleted my SQL Server, if I selected that option right there, that would have it up very quickly. I haven't deleted it, but what I will do is show you what happens if you go through the menu. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it in the same place. I'm just not going to overwrite the one that's there. So basically, I've given it a name, IVMR, for Instant VM Recovery. I'm going to tell my rights to go to the direct attached storage, just because that's got a lot of transient space. I'm not going to connect to the network because the production one is still there. But if I had a real disaster, I need to do that. I need to get this VM up now. So I would hit that power on button and watch this. I should get a message that the the original VM is actually still connected. Let's see what we get here. So basically, I'm going to actually get that virtual machine back up and running very quickly right from the backup resource. This particular VM's running on the tin tree. It is only 100 and something gig, but no matter what your storage is, moving that type of storage might take a long time. So this particular technique will actually publish this virtual machine directly on the host and boot it up right from the backup file. So there it is, IVMR, the Instant VM Recovery virtual machine has been inventoried. You see that the writes are being sent to the direct attached storage. The data store is not the tin tree. The data store is the Veeam backup data store. I actually have a special data store in VMware where I have a window into my backups. And just like that, this VM's been powered on. So a couple people have asked, is it crash consistent? Now, I want to pull up an interesting point. It does start up here. But that's okay because we did properly prepare the VM, but Windows did not log, event log was shut down. So I wanted to do that real quick. And then this virtual machine will power up and be back up and running in moments. That is Instant VM Recovery. Those are some, not all, but just some of the ways you can restore a SQL server with Veeam. And I'm convinced you probably can't do all of that with the tools you may be using right now. So I hope that the interactive demo here really can kind of give you some insight to some of the other things you can do with Veeam. And this is, again, my production VMware Data Center database. There it is. It's ready to go. It's off the network, so it's not going to interfere, but you can quickly see I've reinstantiated it directly from the backup. How cool is that? Anyways, that concludes the interactive demo of Veeam backup and replication here. Now, where we are with Veeam, we're modern data protection. We like to think that things like this, specifically for our SQL Server, these are a modern approach to protecting your VMware and Hyper-V environments. This is modern data protection built for virtualization, powerful, easy to use, and affordable. Our version 7 of Veeam Backup and Replication really builds on this with a lot of market-leading features. I'll just go through this real quick, but basically we have enhanced support for vCloud Director. This is really important for environments building modern data centers. We've listened to our customers. Tape support is coming. If you use SharePoint, oh my goodness, you have to see this tool. We have the SQL stuff that I just showed you, but we also have a great way to recover from SharePoint databases and some new virtual lab capabilities, including what I just showed you, available for Hyper-V. It's a great time to be with Veeam, great time to back up your databases. Okay, let's go to the Q&A. I have a lot of questions in the queue. I appreciate that. You guys have been a great crowd. Let's see what I can do with the Q&A now here. So let's see here. Rob asks, how are those situations supported for a restore? Well, Rob, I would actually just reiterate that using VSS is what we are doing for our backups. We are not actually using a snapshot reversion for our backups. So I'd love for you to give this a try. Try to break it. I think you'll like what you see. Mike asks, does Veeam only still do virtual machines, or can we do physical machines? Oh, Mike, I'd love to be able to tell you that we can do physical, but right now it is still only Hyper-V and VMware virtual machines. So Brian asks a great question. How does Veeam compare to another product? And I'm not going to name the product, but I guarantee you nobody can do the virtual lab. Nobody can do that UR wizard. Nobody has had instant VM recovery as quickly as we have. So I think that that should answer itself. But you know what, Brian, if you have a very specific question, let me know. But basically, you have to give this a try. And if you go to veeam.com, you can download a free copy of Veeam or the trial edition of the fully functional product, and you can check it out on your own. Because I like to think that, don't listen to me. Actually make your own decision on a backup product when it comes to the competitive choice. I realize there's a lot of choices out there. I do understand that. But when it comes to virtual machines, I really want to think that we're the best. So Mike asks another question, and actually, Mike, that's a great point about the 2 terabyte snapshot limit. So for those of you using VMware, you may know that if you have a VMDK exactly equal to 2 terabytes, a VMware snapshot is not supported on those types of virtual disks. The VMDK needs to be 2 terabytes minus 16K. Okay? No, VSS Mike does not get around that issue, but I would encourage you to size them down 16K. A couple of people have asked about webinar replay and slides. You should get an email with these as a follow-up. If not, you can send me an email. I'm just going to put it down here for everyone. If you want it, I'll go ahead and send it to you right away today. To send me an email, I'll get you that. And also veeam.com/videos. Wilfredo asks, will it also have audio? Yeah, veeam.com/videos. We have all the webinars for replay. It'll be this recording for your viewing pleasure and share with your friends. Something to do for Friday night, if you ask me. Paul asks, very good question, Paul. Is there an easy way to give a restored VM a new SID or a duplicate name? Excellent question, Paul. Do you remember when I did the instant VM recovery? There was an option. It said restore to original location or restore to a new location. If I did that original location, the whole thing is put back, including the constructs in the VMware environment. Same for Hyper-V. In fact, in Hyper-V, when you restore, you can optionally keep that SID, or you can create a new one with VMware. If you put it back exactly the way it was, all of that stuff is retained. Does that make sense, Paul? Hopefully so. Let's see here. Nick asks, since the data in the SQL Server is sensitive in nature, do I have an option to encrypt it? Nick, our transfer to the storage resource does not encrypt. We transfer from the source, VMware, encrypted, and then to our repository. We manage that. But then when we write on a volume, I encourage you to use an OS encryptor. We do not provide a direct static encryptor for backup. Brian asks, can you replicate to a hot site at a distant location? Absolutely. The replication engine is actually very advanced, Brian. I encourage you to check that out. Actually, there's a lot of good material on that. It's very, I think, there's an incredible number of features with replication, because really it's everything that backup has plus the ability to run it off-site. So definitely check that out. So the answer is yes, assuming you want to do anything I showed you here today. Redrick asks, for a SQL backup, do you have the ability to do object-level recovery down to the table, view, or stored procedure? Yeah. You could open up SQL Server Management Studio, and if you just needed a line of a stored procedure, yes, you could. David asks, any issues backing up vCenter? We have a KB on how to back up vCenter if you're using version 6.5 or earlier. Our version 7 is coming out very soon, but one of the things we've done is just built that KB into the processing engine. So from version 7, no problems. Version 6, just look at the KB for a couple of tweaks. Christian asks, can you run a VM from a cloud backup source like Azure? No, I cannot run a VM from. I can put a backup in the cloud, and I can even do some of the recovery techniques I've shown you, but no, I cannot manage it being run in the cloud. Redrick asks, does Veeam provide compression? Actually, we do. We provide both compression and deduplication. So street numbers, you can get anywhere from 6 to 10x storage performance just with Veeam's storage efficiencies. Brian asks, what about Exchange? You sold me on SQL. Yes, actually Exchange has a pretty cool story as well. Check out Veeam Explorer for Exchange. Nick, you know, I don't know on your question about VMware View, but I will tell you if it's a linked clone, they're not supported. So hopefully that helps you, because again, we can't call the VMware snapshot. Okay, I apologize for not answering all of the questions interactively with text. I think it's actually more beneficial if I actually just ask the question so everyone can hear. Final call for Q&A, and as I wrap up, I do want to encourage you, go to Veeam.com. We've got a lot of material. The forums, the Veeam blog, I write there, my team writes there, and also Twitter. Twitter is a great resource. If you have a question, throw it out to Veeam, throw it out to me. We'll see if we can find it in the forums, give you an answer off the top of our head. And of course, we've got technical support in your local Veeam partners. Our version 7 at go.veeam.com/7. Wow, it's the biggest thing I've ever seen. I'm really excited. Actually, no changes specifically for SQL Server other than it's now available for Hyper-V for the virtual lab capability. But I really encourage you to check that out very soon. Okay, last two questions came in here. Matt asked, does SQL backend need to be a VM for SharePoint? Yeah, actually, Matt, we do need SharePoint for the Veeam Explorer for SharePoint. Does need to be a virtual SharePoint database and virtual SharePoint web server, actually, for that matter. Ariel asks, what about Unix? Yeah, actually, any supported VMware Hyper-V virtual machine. You know what, Phil? SQL 2000 might be supported. I'd have to check the release notes. I know it'll be supported for the UARE and Virtual Lab. I just don't know if the UARE wizard would be restored. But the whole MDF, the backup, I believe so. I just don't know if the wizard, but I'd check the release notes. Okay, everyone, that concludes our webinar. Really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy day. Stay tuned to Veeam.com for some great news this week. And with that, thanks for attending today's featured webinar.